In the forests of northern Montana, wildlife rehabilitator Jake Thornton and his colleague Emily Walker were patrolling a remote trail when they heard faint cries coming from the underbrush. Investigating cautiously, they discovered 3 abandoned Bobcat kittens, but heartbreakingly only one was still alive. Breaking protocol, Jake took the fragile survivor Bella under his care, nursing her back from the brink. Weeks turned into months as Bella grew from a fragile orphan into a magnificent predator. An extraordinary bond formed between the solitary man and the wild cat. But the wild called, and Jake knew Bella's destiny lay back in the forest. Circumstances forced him to leave her at a sanctuary miles away, and he believed their chapter was closed. Yet a year passed, and Bella remained distant and withdrawn, failing to bond with other animals. Can a wild creature truly remember? This extraordinary story challenges everything we think we know about the hearts of wild animals, and the humans brave enough to love them. Before we begin, hit the like button, make sure you're subscribed, and tap the notification bell so you never miss a story. The early morning mist hung like a veil over the dense pine forests of northern Montana. It was late April, and the first hints of spring were beginning to awaken the wilderness after a long, harsh winter. Jake Thornton pulled his weathered Ford, pick up to a stop at the trailhead and cut the engine. At 42, Jake had spent over half his life working as a wildlife rehabilitator in these forests. His rugged appearance, salt and pepper beard, and deep crow's feet spoke of years in the elements. "Beautiful morning," remarked Emily Walker, Jake's colleague of 3 years, as she climbed out of the passenger side. At 35, Emily had joined the Northern Montana Wildlife Rehabilitation Center after a decade as a veterinary technician, drawn by her passion for wild animal conservation. "Perfect day for trail maintenance," Jake nodded, pulling worn leather gloves from his back pocket. "Trail's been getting washed out pretty bad with the spring thaw. Figure we can clear some debris. Check the camera traps while we're at it." They gathered their gear, backpacks filled with tools, water, and emergency supplies, and set off along a narrow dirt path winding through towering ponderosa pines and Douglas firs. Spring was Jake's favorite time in the forest, the world coming back to life after winter's grip, new growth pushing through the forest floor, wildlife emerging with their young. 2 hours into their work, approaching a particularly remote section of trail, Emily suddenly froze. "Jake, wait, do you hear that?" Jake stopped, tilting his head. At first, all he heard was the rustling of pine needles in the breeze and the distant call of a red-tailed hawk. Then, faintly, he caught a small, distressed cry from the dense underbrush. "Could be injured wildlife," he said quietly, instinctively lowering his voice. "Let's check it out, but keep your distance until we know what we're dealing with." They moved carefully off the trail, stepping over fallen logs and pushing through thick mountain laurel. The cries grew more distinct, high-pitched mewling, sounds that tugged at Jake's heart. After 20 years in wildlife rehab, he recognized the sound of an animal in distress. "There," Emily whispered, pointing to a hollow beneath a rotting log. Jake crouched down to peer into the small space. What he saw made his breath catch. 3 tiny bobcat kittens, no more than a few weeks old, huddled in a nest of leaves and fur. Their spotted coats were unmistakable, but as he looked closer, his heart sank. 2 of the kittens were completely still, their small bodies already growing cold. Only one showed signs of life, weakly mewling and struggling to lift her head. "Damn," Jake muttered, a familiar heaviness settling in. "Looks like Mom hasn't been back for a while." Emily knelt beside him, her expression a mix of sadness and concern. "Probably hunted and killed," she said softly. "We had reports of poachers in this area last month." Jake nodded grimly. Illegal hunting of predators was a constant battle here. He'd seen the toll it took. Orphans, disrupted habitats, a fragile ecosystem thrown into chaos. "The 2 aren't going to make it," he said, gesturing to the motionless kittens, already gone. "But this little one..." He focused on the survivor, a female with unusual markings. A perfect white diamond shape on her chest stood out against her tawny spotted coat. She's severely dehydrated, Emily noted. Probably. Hasn't eaten in days. Jake knew the protocol. Predators like bobcats were to be left alone unless absolutely necessary. But looking at the tiny creature fighting for every breath, he couldn't walk away. "We need to bury these two," he said, gently reaching for the lifeless kittens. With Emily's help, they dug a small grave nearby and laid the bodies to rest. A solemn ritual Jake had performed too many times. Returning to the surviving kitten, Jake made a decision. "I'm taking her," he said, removing his flannel shirt and fashioning it into a makeshift carrier. "She won't last the day out here alone." Emily didn't argue. They both knew the risks. They also knew when those risks were worth it. Jake approached the kitten slowly, speaking in soft, soothing tones. "Hey there, little one," he murmured. "I know you're scared. I know you want your mama." The kitten's barely open eyes found Jake, a striking blue-gray, clouded with fear and exhaustion, but burning with a will to live. Something in that look struck Jake deeply. A connection. A silent plea. Gently, he scooped the kitten into his hands. She was so light, so fragile, her tiny body trembling against his palms. "You're a fighter, aren't you?" Jake whispered, wrapping her in his shirt. "Good. You're going to need that." On the hike back, Jake cradled her close, trying to keep her warm. He'd seen enough rescues to know her chances were slim, but something about her made him determined. "What are you going to name her?" Emily asked as they reached the truck. Jake looked down at the small bundle. The white diamond on her chest gleamed in the light. "Bella," he said softly. "Her name is Bella." The drive back was tense. Jake kept checking on her while Emily called the Wildlife Center and Dr. Martins, the local vet specializing in wild animals. By the time they reached the clinic, Bella was even weaker, refusing drops of sugar water from Jake's emergency dropper. Dr. Sarah Martins, a woman in her early 50s with kind eyes and capable hands, met them at the door. She had worked with Jake for years and trusted his judgment. "Let's see what we've got," she said, leading them to an exam room. She took Bella with practiced gentleness, laying her on the table. "Female, about 3 to 4 weeks old," she noted. "Dehydrated, possibly hypoglycemic, malnourished, but no visible injuries or infection." For the next hour, Dr. Martins and her team worked to stabilize Bella. Fluids, warming her. Jake stayed by her side, his face etched with concern. "Does she have a chance?" he finally asked. Dr. Martins gave a cautious smile. "She's responding to the fluids. Next 24 hours are critical. But she's a fighter, this one. If she makes it through the night, she's got a shot." "I want to take her home," Jake said. "I've got the setup, the experience." Dr. Martins hesitated. "Jake, you know the protocols. The center has Sarah," he interrupted, using her name deliberately. "The center's overcrowded. Spring always brings in more than they can handle. I've got the permits. I can do this." After a moment, she nodded. "Okay, but I want daily updates, and if anything changes, you bring her in immediately." That night, Jake converted his spare bedroom into a rehab space. Soft bedding. A temperature-controlled enclosure. Every 2 hours, he woke to feed Bella a special wild feline formula through a syringe. Each time he held his breath, prayed she'd eat, prayed her body would keep fighting. By morning, Bella was still alive, her eyes clearer, her cries stronger. Jake felt cautious hope. When he called Dr. Martins with the update, he heard the surprise and relief in her voice. "She's responding to you," she said. "That's a good sign. Keep doing what you're doing." Days turned into weeks and Bella grew stronger. Jake stuck to a careful routine, offering the care she needed without letting her get too used to humans. His job was to prepare her for the wild. But despite the professional distance, Jake found himself growing attached to the small bobcat. There was he introduced live prey, first insects, then small rodents, teaching her to hunt just as her mother would have done. Emily visited often, helping with Bella's care and offering companionship to Jake, who had grown increasingly isolated, pouring all his energy into the bobcat's rehabilitation. "You're getting too attached," Emily warned one July afternoon as they watched Bella stalk and pounce on a mouse Jake had released into her enclosure. "What's your..." Exit strategy here? Jake sighed, running a hand through his hair, longer now from the summer months. I know. She needs to go back to the wild. That's the goal. Always has been. But, Emily prompted, already sensing his hesitation. But she's different, Jake admitted. There's something about her, Em. The way she looks at me sometimes. It's like she understands. Emily's expression softened. They're magnificent animals, she said, and she owes her life to you. That creates a bond. But Jake, you know the best thing for her is the life she was born for, Jake nodded. As summer faded into fall, Bella matured into a striking young bobcat, her coat thickening for winter, her movements more fluid and powerful. She hunted independently now, showing all the instincts and skills needed to survive in the wild. It only was time to start planning her release, a process that would need to be gradual, in tune with the seasons and the right habitat. He consulted colleagues at the Wildlife Center, selected a remote area with strong bobcat territory, and began making preparations. But complications emerged. Neighbors started reporting bobcat sightings near their properties. Likely, Bella, who had begun to roam during her supervised night outings. Then came a stern warning from the local wildlife officer about keeping a predator in captivity without certified facilities. She's being rehabilitated for release, Jake argued in a tense meeting at the Wildlife Center. I have the permits. We're following protocol. The longer she stays with you, the harder it will be for her to readjust to the wild, countered Richard Owens, the senior wildlife biologist. And frankly, Jake, there's concern about your objectivity here. Before Jake could defend himself, his phone rang, his sister calling from Oregon. Their father had suffered a serious heart attack. He had to go, immediately, and he didn't know how long he'd be gone. We can take her, Richard offered, his tone softening at Jake's visible distress. The Eastern Montana Sanctuary agreed. Large natural enclosure, other bobcats, good socialization. It might be best. With no other viable options and family needs pressing, Jake reluctantly agreed. The next morning, he helped transport Bella to the sanctuary, about 100 miles east. The staff reassured him they'd continue her rehabilitation with the goal of release, though they warned that animals exposed to prolonged human care often struggled to fully rewild. Saying goodbye to Bella was one of the hardest things Jake had ever done. As she was led away in a transport cage, she looked back at him with those intelligent eyes, and Jake could have sworn he saw betrayal in them. I'm sorry, girl, he whispered. I hope you understand someday. Jake spent 3 months in Oregon helping his father recover and taking care of overdue family matters. He called the sanctuary weekly for updates on Bella, but the news grew more troubling. She wasn't adjusting. She remained aloof, avoided communal areas, and showed signs of stress and depression. She's physically fine, said Sandra Nguyen, the sanctuary's director. But emotionally, it's like she's waiting for something, or someone. The words hit Jake like a gut punch. Despite everything he knew professionally, he'd let his bond with Bella grow too strong, and now she was paying the price. I'm coming back, he decided, already making travel arrangements. I need to see her. 2 days later, Jake pulled into the sanctuary's gravel lot, heart pounding. What if she didn't remember him? What if seeing him only made things worse? Sandra met him at the entrance, her expression guarded. I should warn you, she's withdrawn. Don't expect too much. Jake nodded, bracing himself as they walked toward the enclosures. The sanctuary was impressive, expansive habitats designed to mimic the wild. They stopped at a high fenced area where a lone bobcat lay on a rocky ledge, her back to them. That's her, Sandra said softly. She spends most of her time up there. Jake stepped toward the fence, his throat tight. Bella, he called gently, making the familiar clicking sound he'd used when feeding her as a kitten. At first, nothing. Then her ears twitched. Slowly, she turned her head toward him. Their eyes met. For a moment, time stood still. Bella remained motionless, Then the tip of her tail began to twitch. In a sudden burst of movement, she leapt from the ledge, bounding down the rocks with stunning speed and grace. She raced across the enclosure straight to Jake, stopping just short of the fence, her whole body trembling with excitement. "Oh my God," Sandra whispered. "She's never moved like that here." Jake knelt, his eyes locked with Bella's. "Hey there. Beautiful girl," he said. "Remember me?" Bella paced along the fence, chuffing, a low, familiar feline sound. Her gaze never left his face. There was no mistaking the recognition. "She knows you," Sandra said in awe, "even after all this time." "Can I go in?" Jake asked. Sandra hesitated briefly, then nodded. "We'll follow protocol," she said, guiding him to the double-gated entrance. "Be careful, she's still wild." Inside, Jake moved slowly, crouching a few feet away, letting Bella take the lead. "It's me," he whispered. "I've missed you." Bella stared, unmoving, then stepped forward with confidence, not caution. She stopped in front of him, so close he could feel her breath. Then, gently, she placed one paw on his knee. The same gesture she'd used as a kitten, a behavior unique to her. "She remembers," Jake whispered, tears rising. Then, astonishing even him, Bella rubbed her head against his arm, a clear sign of affection before settling beside him, her body completely relaxed. "This is extraordinary," Sandra said from outside the enclosure. "I've never seen anything like it." They remained together nearly an hour. Bella stayed close, occasionally making soft sounds, almost like conversation. When it came time for Jake to leave, he felt the heavy weight of responsibility return. What now? She wasn't thriving at the sanctuary, but was she truly fit for the wild? In the days that followed, Jake had long discussions with Sandra and the veterinary team. They reviewed Bella's history, her behavior, and her prospects. In the end, they reached an unconventional but compassionate decision. "She can stay here," Sandra proposed, "in a specialized enclosure with everything she needs, and you can stay involved, visits, enrichment, not as an owner, but as her caretaker." It wasn't what Jake had planned when he rescued the tiny kitten, but looking at Bella now, healthy, strong, still connected, he knew it was right. Jake relocated back to Montana, taking a job that allowed him to be near the sanctuary. He visited Bella regularly, honoring her wildness while nurturing their unique bond. Over time, she accepted other caregivers too, but she always saved something special for Jake.